welcome back to Mo's Minute. So we're talking today about the Carolands mansion. They don't allow filming there, which is why this broadcast is coming to you from my living room. Um, and it's hard to see from the street because of all the trees and stuff. So that kind of gives it like this air of mystery. Oh, and plus there's also a murder there. Yeah, minor details. Anyway, uh, I've never been on the property. I've certainly never been inside, and I didn't even know where it was for most of my life. So there's a lot of suspense and intrigue surrounding it. I've been fascinated for years. So, little bit of history. It was commissioned in 1914 by Harriet Pullman Carolan. And Harriet Pullman was a railroad heiress, hence Pullman Railroad Car. But she was also a total diva. She had a lot of interest, she was very cultured, but she always wanted to have the best of everything. There's a story that she had like $30,000 in jewelry stolen from the St. Regis Hotel in New York, and she sued the hotel because of the effect that this robbery would have had on her social life. So it should come as no surprise that she wanted to build the like grandest house around, and build a house that would excite people. Um, so she was obsessed with France. So this was gonna have like all the best French gardens, French doors, French features, everything. It was gonna be like hugely elaborate. So before I get to more of the house, in 1892 she married Frank Carolan, and he's from here. He was from here. He was a polo player, and so they immediately moved west to San Francisco. She was from Chicago. Um, but she wasn't popular in the city. I couldn't really tell you why. So they moved to Burlingame. But then Burlingame wanted Frank to add sidewalks to his property, and he wasn't too keen on that idea. So then he decided to settle a little bit up the hill in what is now Hillsborough. At the time, it wasn't really much. Um, and the house actually was 1/6 of Hillsborough. Literally 1/6 of the entire town of Hillsborough was the Carolan property. The gatehouse still stands. Um, and the gatehouse is literally 1.3 miles away from the mansion. I looked it up on Google Maps. So that should give you, that should kind of indicate exactly how much property they owned. It was like 550 acres or something insane like that. So, of course, Harriet being Harriet, she hired the best of the best to design it, and that was Ernest Sanson. And then she hired Willis Polk to build it. And he was a huge architect at the time, especially in the San Francisco area. I'm pretty sure that Polk Street in the city is named for him and not the president, but don't quote me on that. Okay, so Harriet and Frank move into the mansion in 1916, but it was not a match made in heaven. And in 1917, they separated. In 1918, they closed the house. In 1923, Frank died, and the property was then left to Harriet. She remarried. I don't remember exactly what year she remarried. I'm pretty sure it was after Frank's death. Um, and although she still had the house, she rarely used it. So by 1928, it was for sale. And it went through a ton of owners. I counted, I think there's been like 11 or 12 owners. People kept wanting to develop it. So they buy it, try to develop it, fail and sell it. Buy it, try to develop it, fail and sell it. Um, It wasn't until 1975 that it was designated a historical landmark, which finally saved it from the wrecking ball. But still, like, people were buying it and then selling it and rarely actually using it. So the house started to fall into major disrepair. Even Congress considered buying it. No joke. They considered buying it in 1939, and then they considered buying it again during the Kennedy administration. And the idea was that it was going to be like a Western sort of White House. Clearly, that didn't happen. But who did buy it was Lillian Remillard, and I'm pretty sure the street that Carolands is now named is the street that Carolands is on is named for her. Um, it had been abandoned for years, and people, like I said, people just kept buying it and selling it and trying to develop it, and they were selling off land. So the 554 acres it originally sat on was dwindling and dwindling and dwindling. And then Lillian bought it in 1950. And you can imagine when she bought it, it had seen get better days. Um, she literally bought it to save it from the wrecking ball, so we owe her a great debt. And she actually lived there. She opened it up and used it for a lot of different events. It was probably the first time that anyone in Burlingame or Hillsborough had even seen Carolyn's. So Burlingame named her Woman of the Year twice. Um, and she put in a ton of work. Like, she literally ran out of money putting work into it. So then when she died in, I believe, 1973, it like went into probate, like probate auction, and people were getting it from probate auctions and then trying to develop it and sell it again. It was kind of an ongoing cycle. So even though it was rarely occupied in these years, like Harriet and Frank kind of lived there, and Lillian lived there, and then all these other people who owned it in between, they rarely, if ever, lived there. So it was pretty much constantly abandoned. But Hillsborough would have security guards, um, like patrolling the property and just making sure that no one, like, screwed anything up or got into major trouble or anything there. I'm sure you can imagine that people used to sneak up there all the time. I mean, I'm sure I would have too if I were alive back then. My friends and I in high school would frequently go driving around Hillsborough just to check out all the gorgeous houses. So we never found carolings on those drives, but it was still a frequent activity for us. Um, so, like I said, security guards patrolling. And in 1985, a security guard named David Allen Rayleigh lured two high school girls, to the property for a private tour. Their names were Lori and Janine. And while he was giving them this tour, he claimed to hear police dogs. So he locked them in a safe in the basement. They had asked him not to lock them in, but he did anyway, which was, probably the first sign of something really bad. Um, and I don't want to get into too many of the specifics, the gory specifics, but he handcuffed when he came back down after, chasing away the police dogs. He handcuffed them and then took turns raping them and beating them. So he raped and beat them repeatedly. And then he stabbed them. He told them that if they were quiet, he would let them go, but of course that was a lie. And like this went on for hours. And then, because I believe he was the night guard. So at like, when it was time for his shift end, like the next day, like 4 p.m., um, like he had already like raped and tortured them for hours. He rolled them up in a carpet and put them in the trunk of his car. And then he, like, gave the keys to his boss and like shot the breeze a little bit before, like, going on his merry way. So it wasn't till like 5:15 that he actually left, when his shift ended at 4. And he, just happened to have um traumatized and bleeding teenagers in the trunk of his car. So he drove to San Jose. He lived in San Jose, and he drove down there, parked the car in his garage, with two traumatized, bleeding teenagers in the trunk, and literally, like, had dinner with his family and watched TV with his dad and played Monopoly with his sister like a normal night. So, yeah, no joke. Dude was seriously twisted. And so, like, later on that night, I think like 11 p.m. or something, he drove to a ravine off, like, I think Silver Creek Road or something like that. I'm not familiar with the street. Like, I read it, but I'm not familiar with it. Um and they were in this carpet in the trunk of his car, and he just like dropped them off the side of the ravine and just left them there for dead. One of the girls, her name was Lori, managed to crawl out. And so she had like 35 stab wounds. Yeah, 35 stab wounds. And she crawled out, and she actually crawled to the top of the ravine, and she um and flagged down a passing car. And so, because of her, she and Janine were both rescued. But Janine later died from her injuries. Lori survived, even with the torture and the beating and the rape and the 35 stab wounds. She managed to survive. And David Rayleigh is now, well, not now, because they took out the death penalty at San Quentin, but he was actually sentenced to death penalty, and he was at San Quentin for a long time. So I'm not presently sure of his location. He is either still at San Quentin, where but with life in prison instead of the death penalty, or they transferred him to another facility. I'm not sure which, but I'll try to find out and let you know. But yeah, so he was caught and he was convicted. Um, but as you can imagine, the story really didn't do any favors for the house. It was seen as even more of a like creepy, mysterious, haunted house. It's actually not haunted, but you can imagine, after a murder basically taking place there, that it would be. And people just kept buying it, and then trying to find a way to develop it, and then selling it and not living in it. And then in 1998, that changed when Charles and Ann Johnson bought it. He was the CEO of Franklin Templeton, and she had first seen the house in 1991 at like a charity event, and she fell in love and basically was like, I'm going to buy this house someday. They're also part owners of the Giants, and they're huge, like, philanthropists. So they bought the house in 1998, and they actually lived in it. But they also opened it up for a ton of events. So, like, the San Francisco Symphony has had a bunch of, like, donor events there. And I think the museum I used to work at had a few events there. And yeah, so a lot of people started to rent out the space for their various programs and such. And they did major renovations as well. They kind of had to. And they lived there until 2012. Yeah, 2012, and that's when they donated it to their private um foundation, which is called the Carolands Foundation. Um, Um, they claimed tax exempt status on it because they said that it was going to be open every day for tours and it was like a museum. Um, which it's actually not. And then they moved to Florida and they donated a bunch of money to Trump. Um, and now the Carolands Foundation offers tours most Wednesdays at 1 o'clock for 2 hours. And it's basically like a lottery system. Um, yeah, it's basically a lottery system as to who gets it. So it's rarely actually open. Um, so they kind of I think they kind of got into a little bit of trouble for that, but I'm not quite sure. Articles that I read said that tax and legal experts were questioning the validity of the donation since the mansion has not been opened full time the way they said it was, but I don't know if there were any repercussions for that. But maybe someday it will actually be open full time and I will get to see the inside of it. One can only hope. Um, so I will show a picture of it at the end of the video so that you guys can see. And then you can also Google it, Carolyn's Mansion Hillsborough or Carolyn's Chateau, and you will be floored. It is gorgeous. So, yeah, hope you guys enjoy, and we will be back next week. Thanks.